The first light always arrives the same way. Slow, deliberate, and silver. It drips down the glass panes of the lantern room like water through fingers, catching on every curve of the lens until the whole tower seems to breathe. That's when I know morning has found me again. Before we continue, make sure to hit the like button. Also, tell us in the comments, what time is it where you are right now and which city are you watching from? I love seeing how far our stories travel. I stood there in the stillness, polishing the brass rail that circles the beacon. The metal was warm from yesterday's sun, and each circular motion brought a faint reflection of my face into view. Older, lined, but steady. My name's Oscar. 74 years of tides and storms have carved their marks into me, but this light, it's kept me honest. Every dawn I clean the glass and wind the clockwork. It's a ritual one my wife and I began when the lighthouse first went dark decades ago. We fought to restore it, not just as a monument, but as a promise. The day she passed, she took my hand and whispered, "Keep the light burning, no matter who forgets its meaning." So I did. Through storms that rattled the coast, through winters when ice crawled up the tower walls, through long nights when her voice was only a memory echoing in the surf, I kept it burning. This place is more than stone and steel, it's a heartbeat, one I guard the way a captain guards a compass. That morning the air had a bite of salt and change. The sea was too calm, and calm seas always made me wary. I was halfway through tightening a bolt on the lantern housing when the phone in my jacket buzzed. A sound that didn't belong here. "Hey, Oscar!" My son-in-law's voice hit like static. Bright, careless, and far too loud for this sacred quiet. "Good news! I've got something big lined up for you." He always spoke as though the world were a stage and he was the headliner. I didn't answer right away. I just listened to the wind whistle through the tower slits. He kept talking. "So we're hosting a retreat next weekend. Brand collab, influencer crowd, a little networking thing, and I figured, what better place than the Lighthouse, right? Authentic, vintage, coastal aesthetic." He laughed. "You'll love it. It'll go viral." My hand froze on the brass. For a moment, all I heard was the soft tick of the rotation motor. "Did you ask my daughter?" I said finally. My voice came out low, steady, too calm to sound angry. "Come on, old man," he chuckled. "We're family, and besides, she said you love company. It's just a few days. We'll bring the crew, shoot some content, maybe even get donations for the lighthouse restoration. Win-win." Company. Donations, words that tasted like plastic in my mouth. "This isn't a venue," I said. "It's a home, a working beacon." He laughed again, that hollow kind of laugh that never touches the eyes. "Don't be dramatic. We'll clean up after ourselves. You can even be part of the video. People love heartfelt stories. Think about it. The old lighthouse keeper, symbol of endurance. You'll trend." He said it like he was offering me a gift, like fame could replace reverence. "I don't want to trend," I whispered. "What's that?" "Nothing," I said. "You go ahead and plan your retreat, but remember one thing." "What's that?" "The sea doesn't take orders." He paused, maybe confused, maybe not listening. Then he said, "Perfect. You're gonna love it. We'll be there Friday." The line clicked dead before I could answer. Silence returned, heavier than before. I stared out the window where the ocean stretched like molten glass. And somewhere beneath that calm, I felt the weight of the tide turning. My wife used to say the sea knows before we do. When something's about to change, when peace is about to break. I went downstairs, each step echoing through the narrow spiral like the slow swing of a pendulum. On the bottom floor, the old radio sat on the table beside the keeper's log. I opened the book and began to write. "Visitors coming. Storm likely." My handwriting shook a little, but not from fear. It was the quiet before a reckoning. That perfect stillness before the first gust hits the glass. Outside, gulls screamed against the wind. The tide had started to rise earlier than usual. I watched foam roll over the rocks, swallowing the footprints I'd left the day before. Nature doesn't leave traces for long. It wipes the slate clean again and again. That evening I walked along the shore, the lantern beam sweeping above me like a slow heartbeat in the mist. My wife's garden had gone wild since she passed. Sea lavender creeping over the path, little shells tucked among roots. I bent down and traced one with my finger. "You were right," I murmured. "People forget what's sacred." The beam swept again, one long flash too short, and the sound of the foghorn carried through the night. Out there, a trawler's light blinked against the horizon, steady as breathing. I stood watching it until the last hint of dusk bled away. The lighthouse had kept sailors from crashing against the rocks for more than a century. Now it would have to keep my family from crashing against themselves. When I climbed back inside, the air smelled faintly of salt and brass polish. I lit the small lamp by the keeper's desk and ran my hand over the old ledger. Every line in it carried years of storms, repairs, ships saved and lost. And tomorrow another kind of storm would arrive. One made of noise, vanity, and ignorance. But I've weathered worse. I know how to let a storm spend itself. I looked up at the lens above, turning slow, unwavering to her, and whispered, "Let them come." Then I closed the logbook, wound the lamp once more, and listened as the beam rolled out across the sea. Somewhere out there the world thought it was coming to play by my light, but the light, as ever, belonged to the ocean, and the ocean answers to no one. The morning they came, the fog was still thick enough to swallow the horizon. From the lantern room, the world below looked like a ghost story. Outlines of vans, camera tripods, people shouting through the mist. The first gulls scattered when engines roared across the gravel path that led up from the causeway. By the time I reached the base of the tower, voices were echoing off the old stone, laughter, music. The kind of careless joy that belongs to people who've never watched a storm tear apart a dock. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on a rag. The smell of diesel and sunscreen hit first. Then came the flashing lights, ring lights, camera rigs, bright as sunrise and twice as false. My son-in-law stood near the gate, directing a pair of young men unloading boxes of branded water bottles. He wore white sneakers that gleamed against the damp rock, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oscar," he called, waving like we were old friends meeting at a cafe. "Perfect timing, man. We're setting up the staging area right here." He pointed toward the patch of grass where the fog bell used to stand. "Great light for interviews." I took a breath that tasted of salt and iron. "That area's off limits. Soil's unstable." He grinned. "Don't worry, we've got sandbags." Another truck backed up, tires grinding. The gulls cried louder, circling above as if the noise offended them. Behind the driver's seat, a group of bright-haired kids spilled out, phones already raised. One girl gasped, "Oh my God, this place is so aesthetic." The boy beside her twirled a camera on his wrist. "Dude, this lighting is insane. We should totally do a sunrise meditation reel up there." He nodded toward the lantern room as though it were a rooftop bar. My daughter followed a few steps behind, carrying a thermos. Her eyes found mine, apologetic. "Dad," she said softly, "they're just getting things organized. It's only for the weekend." I studied her face. The same brown eyes her mother had, now rimmed with guilt. "You're helping with this?" She hesitated. He promised it would be respectful, educational even. They'll talk about history, sustainability. "While live streaming?" I asked. She looked down. "It's what people respond to." I turned toward the sea. The waves were small, playful even, tapping against the rocks. They always looked harmless before they turned. One of the young men approached me, clipboard in hand. "Sir, do you have a Wi-Fi password? We're setting up the stream deck." "There's no internet in the tower," I said. "It's a lighthouse, not a studio." He blinked, then grinned awkwardly, thinking I was joking. "Right, we'll use cellular." They moved like a tide of neon and noise, carrying boxes past, me ignoring the signs that said authorized personnel only. Cables snaked through the courtyard, trailing into open doors. Inside, the air filled with chatter, perfume, and the synthetic rhythm of someone's portable speaker. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. By noon, the generator thumped behind the storage shed. I stood by the shoreline, watching them from a distance. My daughter tried to mediate. She followed him, whispered reminders about boundaries, safety, the old railing that could give way. He brushed her off with a hand on her shoulder and a practiced smile. She caught my eye and mouthed, "I'll fix it." But some things don't get fixed with words. Around mid-afternoon, a drone buzzed past my ear, zipping toward the beacon. I could hear them laughing below, shouting, "Get the aerials!" I walked back to the tower and locked the lantern room door from the inside. Then I cut the breaker to the auxiliary outlets. Half the lights went dark in a heartbeat. From outside, confusion rippled through the group. "Power cut out!" someone yelled. I leaned against the wall, listening to the scramble, to the frustration in my son-in-law's voice as he barked orders. He found me a few minutes later, sweat beading on his forehead. "Hey, the power's tripping, you know what's up?" "The system's old," I said. "It doesn't like being overloaded." "Well, can you fix it? We've got expensive gear here." I shrugged. "Best to let it rest for now, she's sensitive to heat." "She?" He frowned. "The lighthouse," I said. He laughed, forced and sharp. "Right, sure. Let me know when it's safe, okay? We're losing daylight." When he left, I turned the breaker back on, just enough for the beacon's motor to hum again. Its slow rotation swept across their equipment, washing every shiny lens in cold, indifferent light. Evening came with a smear of pink across the horizon. They built a fire pit down near the rocks, ignoring the no flame sign. The smell of lighter fluid crawled up the slope. I watched from the balcony, my hands gripping the rail until my knuckles went white. My wife's voice came back to me then. Gentle, warning. "Respect the elements, Oscar. They don't forgive arrogance." I whispered to the dark. "Neither do I." Down below, my son-in-law raised a glass to the crowd. "To light, legacy, and going viral," he shouted. The others cheered, the firelight flickering across their faces. The sea wind shifted. Sparks blew toward the grass. I walked back inside, opened the keeper's log, and wrote again. "Invasion continues. Patience holding." Then I added a single line beneath it. "The tide comes in at dawn." I set the pen down and looked toward the window where the beam turned, slow and steady. They didn't see it. How the light kept sweeping past them over the cliffs, across the waves. It never stopped to shine on anyone, it just kept moving, impartial, eternal. And somewhere inside me, a plan was beginning to take shape. Quiet, measured, like the turn of a tide too far offshore for them to hear. The fog had burned away by morning, leaving the sea stretched out like a sheet of hammered glass. I could see the mainland faintly, gray rooftops, church steeple, the slow drift of gulls over the harbor. Up here, though, the only sound was the motor hum of the generator they'd dragged in, and the rising chatter of people setting up ring lights and tripods again. I made coffee in the small galley kitchen and listened. Every laugh, every shout carried up the stone throat of the lighthouse. They were rehearsing introductions, lines about embracing heritage and the intersection of past and modern creativity. The words felt hollow against the memory of storms that had once rattled these walls. I opened the ledger on the table and wrote, 0847. Intrusion ongoing, preparing countermeasures, not anger, not revenge, just correction. You can't argue with the sea, you adjust your course. Downstairs, I found the lockbox where I'd kept the old paperwork, permits, inspection records, a folded copy of the conservation easement my wife and I had signed with the Maritime Heritage Foundation years ago. She'd been meticulous about it, insisting the tower should always remain a living educational site, and that commercial use would void its private occupancy for up to 30 days under custodial review. At the time, I'd thought her thoroughness excessive. Now it felt like foresight. I laid the documents out across the table, smoothing each creased page. Then I reached for the phone. Maritime Heritage, this is Willa, a voice said after 2 rings. Willa, it's Oscar Hale from Cross Point Light. A pause. Oscar, it's been years. What can we do for you? I explained, briefly, factually, the situation. Unauthorized gathering, equipment, open flame near historic structure, possible damage risk. Do you have a current easement certificate? She asked. I'm looking at it, I said. Signed by both of us, effective still. Then you can request temporary custodianship transfer. I'll need photos and a formal notice. I can deliver both by noon. She hesitated, then softened. We'll send a field officer to confirm. You holding up? I looked through the open door toward the yard where my son-in-law posed in front of a drone camera, arm around my daughter, smile too big for the moment. I'm steady, I said. Just keeping the light. After hanging up, I went about the preparations the same way I'd once readied the tower for a storm. Methodical, unhurried. I tested the foghorn relay, still working. I ran the beacon through its cycle, adjusting the timing so that it would flash precisely every 12 seconds instead of 8. That would complicate their lighting rigs later. I checked the stairwell railing, tightened the bolts, and placed a new sign at the base. Restricted access, maintenance testing in progress. Each act was small, polite, entirely within the law. At 10:30, I drove the old pickup into town to mail the packet. Notice of custodianship activation, photographs, a copy of the easement clause. On the way back, I stopped by the Pier Cafe where the retired Coast Warden Ellis still spent his mornings. He looked up over his mug when he saw me. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Oscar Hale in daylight hours. Everything all right up there? Not yet, I said. Might need you to verify a safety inspection soon. His eyebrows rose. You finally calling in that foundation clause? Seems time, he smiled, slow and knowing. Then I'll polish my badge. When I returned, the air around the lighthouse had changed. They'd draped banners along the fence, staked a canopy in the field, laid out folding chairs in neat rows. It looked like a wedding without reverence. My son-in-law spotted me. Oscar, my man, wait till you see the turnout. We've got local press coming, a few investors flying in. This place is trending, can you believe it? I can believe many things, I said. He laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. We're gonna make you famous. I already am, I said, and left him blinking behind me. Inside, the tower smelled faintly of salt and smoke. They'd brought in scented candles, an absurd detail that somehow offended me most of all. I snuffed them out one by one, then placed a small placard beside the logbook on the display table. Do not touch. Archival material. For a while, I simply sat in the keeper's chair, listening to the distant rise and fall of their voices outside. My wife's photograph hung by the desk, a black and white shot of her on the balcony, hair whipping across her face. I traced the outline of her smile with a thumb. You wrote the rules, I murmured. Now I'll follow them. By afternoon, I had received Willa's confirmation email. The Maritime Heritage Foundation would dispatch an officer by the weekend. Pending inspection, the lighthouse would fall under foundation control until the review was complete. That meant any non-educational event would be suspended by law. All I had to do was wait. At dusk, I walked the perimeter, checking the tide markers. Seafoam glowed faintly in the half-light, and each wave folded in with a steady hiss. I remembered how my wife used to count them during storms. 7 calm, 1 wild, she'd say, smiling. That's the rhythm of things. Inside, the guests gathered around their campfire again, shouting into cameras, chasing each other through the grass. My daughter's laugh sounded thin, forced. I leaned on the railing and watched until the stars began to blink through the mist. Then I whispered the same words I'd once said to the sea after a near-miss storm in '82. Hold steady, girl. We'll ride this one out. Beacon turned above me, patient, endless. Each rotation threw a long sweep of light over their little world, too bright for their lenses, too honest for their filters. Tomorrow, I thought, the tide begins to change. The day they called launch day started before sunrise. I heard them before I saw them, shoes scuffing across the stones, voices rising over the gulls, someone laughing too loud for morning. By the time the first pale light touched the water, the courtyard was crowded. Tables, banners, cables, the whole scene pulsing with borrowed energy. From the top deck, I watched them turn the old lighthouse into a stage. My son-in-law moved through it all like a conductor, headset on, calling shots. We go live in 10. Remember authenticity. The word rolled through the fog like a bad echo. I went about my routine. Coffee, notebook, a slow circuit of the railings. Each hinge was oiled, each bolt checked. I told myself to keep breathing, to keep listening. Half an hour later, a knock came at the metal door. My daughter stood there, hair pulled back, coat unzipped against the wind. She looked tired. "Morning, Dad," she said. "Morning." "They'll be shooting in the lantern room for just a few minutes. He wanted me to make sure it's okay." I looked past her to where a cluster of strangers were already lining up with cameras. "It isn't." She sighed, the way people do when they know they've lost a piece of themselves but can't stop it. "It's just for the intro. He wants the light in the background. It's important for the investors." "The light isn't a prop," I said. "I know." She hesitated. "Please, it'll keep the peace." I let her go. Some lessons can't be handed down. They have to hit hard enough to leave a mark. By mid-morning, the wind picked up. The air carried that heavy taste of salt that comes before weather. They kept filming anyway. Someone played music from a speaker, another shouted directions over it. I stayed on the balcony watching them climb the tower steps one after another, ring lights bouncing against the walls. The rhythm of their shoes made the old iron groan. Inside the lantern room, they spread out like tourists. My son-in-law stood at the center, talking into his phone camera. Behind me is the legendary cross-point light, symbol of endurance, rebuilt by my amazing family. He didn't even glance at the lens, the real one that mattered, the one that had guided sailors home longer than any of us had been alive. Then it happened. One of the guests, a boy no older than 20, wandered toward the display table by the window. The logbook sat there, open to the page my wife had written the night of the '82 storm. I'd shown it once to the foundation, never to the public. He picked it up, tilting it toward the light. "Hey, this thing's vintage," he said. "Get a shot of it." I started up the stairs, each step a drum beat in my chest. He flipped a page, another. Then with a careless turn, the paper tore near the binding. A sound so small it might have been the wing of a gull, but it cut through me like steel. The room went still. My son-in-law turned, saw the look on my face, and tried to laugh. "Relax, Oscar. We'll digitize it later. No harm done." No harm? My voice came out low, more breath than sound. I walked to the table, took the book from the boy's hands. The tear was clean, but the edges curled like a wound. I pressed the pages together, felt the tremor in my fingers. This log was written the night the Edith May almost went down, I said. Those numbers kept a ship from splintering on the shoals. She wrote them while the waves came through the door. He smirked. It's just paper. Something inside me, something quiet and long restrained, shifted. It's never just anything, I said. Outside, the wind slammed against the windows. The gulls screamed. My daughter whispered his name, trying to pull him back, but he brushed her off. Come on, don't make it weird. It's a storybook. We'll frame it. I closed the log, tied its ribbon, and turned to the stairway. The others parted as I passed. No shouting, no grand speech. Just the creak of boots and the slow beat of the foghorn rolling through the mist. Downstairs, I set the book in the desk drawer and locked it. Then I picked up the phone. Willa, I said when she answered, they've breached artifact protocol. I'll notify the warden, she said. Expect inspection within 24 hours. When I hung up, I went outside. The air had changed color, sky gone from gray to iron. Sea foam blew across the rocks like torn paper. I stood at the edge, letting the wind slap against my coat, and thought of the first time I'd taught my daughter to read the tides. How the water curls before it turns. How the pull feels in your bones. Behind me, music started again. Laughter. The show must go on. I walked back to the door, looked once more at the tower rising against the storm. All right, I whispered. You warned them. That night the wind screamed through the vents and the beacon cut through rain like a blade. Down below their party carried on. Shouts muffled by glass, bursts of light flickering in the fog. I sat by the window, the logbook safe in the drawer, and listened as thunder rolled over the water. They thought they were making history, but history, I've learned, decides for itself who gets remembered. The storm that had been murmuring all afternoon finally spoke. Rain came sideways across the glass, hard enough to make the tower shudder. The sound folded into the heartbeat of the foghorn, deep and steady. I'd heard that rhythm for half a lifetime. It always meant time to act. From the balcony, I saw flashes of movement. My son-in-law's crew dragging tarps over their cameras, lights flickering as breakers tripped. The sea behind them churned like iron under a hammer. He was shouting orders again, voice cutting through the wind. Keep shooting, this'll look epic. I went downstairs, boots thudding against the metal steps. In the galley, I poured coffee, black and strong, and waited for the next knock. It came sooner than expected. 3 quick raps, then the door swung wide. Power's out again, he said, shaking water from his jacket. We need the main line back on. Not while the lightning's this close, I said. You'll fry your gear. He frowned. We've got surge protection. Not for the sea. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched. I took a slow sip and met his eyes. For the first time, I saw the unease behind all that performance, like he'd felt the floor shift and wasn't sure why. Then headlights cut through the fog. A vehicle climbed the causeway, white, official, with the Maritime Heritage Foundation crest on the side. Another followed. The warden's truck. He turned toward the window. What's this? Inspection, I said. You wanted authenticity, here it is. Outside, the rain softened to drizzle. 2 figures stepped out. Willa, hood up against the wind, and Ellis, the warden, in his faded blue slicker. They walked side by side up the slope, carrying clipboards. I opened the door before they could knock. Oscar, Willa said, smiling politely. Sorry for the short notice, but the custodianship transfer took effect at noon. We're here to verify compliance. Right on time, I said. My son-in-law stepped forward, charm switching back on like a reflex. Hey there, appreciate you folks coming out. We've got a bit of a situation with weather, but we're good to keep shooting. Just a small family event. Ellis looked past him at the banners fluttering from the fence. Family event with sponsors? They're just friends. Willa opened her folder. Our records show non-educational use without authorization. Under the easement, that suspends private occupancy for 30 days pending review. He blinked. I'm sorry, what does that mean? It means, I said quietly, you're done here. The wind tugged at his jacket. The group behind him started to drift closer, murmuring. Someone filmed the exchange, uncertain whether it was content or consequence. Willa gestured toward the tower. We'll need everyone to vacate the structure immediately, for safety and preservation. You can't just kick us out, he said. We've got contracts, schedules. You have violations, Ellis interrupted. His voice was gravel, steady as a tide chart. Artifact mishandling, fire hazard, unapproved electrical loads. You want to argue, do it with a lawyer on Monday, but tonight you pack up. He turned to me, eyes narrowing. You set this up. I didn't deny it. I followed the law, same one your wife and I signed to protect this place long before you thought of hashtags. For a long moment, no one moved. The rain hissed against the rocks, thunder rumbling farther out to sea. Then he barked a laugh, high, nervous. Fine, you win. We'll go. He spun, shouting for everyone to start loading up. The charm was gone now, replaced by the flat edge of humiliation. The investors muttered. Crew members yanked cords from sockets. I stood at the door, letting the cold air sweep through. Each crash of gear into the van sounded like waves against the hull of a ship that didn't know it was already sinking. Willa walked the perimeter with her flashlight, checking signage, making notes. Everything looks intact, she said when she came back. You did well, Oscar. Just keeping her steady, I said. Ellis gave me a nod. They'll think twice before treating a working light like a toy. When the last vehicle pulled away, the silence felt enormous. Only the sea remained, breathing against the rocks. My daughter stood near the gate, rain clinging to her hair. Dad, she said softly. I turned. Her voice broke a little. I didn't know it would go this far. It went exactly as far as it needed to. She looked down at her hands. He's angry. He'll have time to cool off. The sea teaches patience. She nodded, tears mixing with rain. I wanted to reach for her, but some distances need time before they close. When she finally walked away, following the taillights down the road, I went back inside. The tower smelled of wet stone and old oil. I climbed to the lantern room and sat beside the beacon, watching the light sweep out into the dark. Each rotation found a new piece of water to touch, each flash a silent word. Still here. Still burning. Down below, the tide was rising again, covering their footprints in the sand. I whispered to the empty air. Lesson delivered. The beam turned once more and the world went quiet. The storm left quietly, as storms often do. By morning the wind had died and the sea lay still, breathing in long, tired sighs. The world smelled of salt and wet earth. Puddles mirrored the gray sky, and gulls strutted along the shoreline, picking through seaweed and shells that hadn't been there yesterday. Inside the lighthouse, the silence was almost kind. I brewed coffee, poured it into 2 cups out of habit, then set one gently across from me. Her cup. The handle was chipped, same as it had been for 20 years. Some things you keep not because they're perfect, but because they remind you of what was. I'd slept maybe an hour. The echo of engines leaving still clung to the air. The tower felt lighter, though, cleansed. I went up to the lantern room to check for damage. The floor was damp, a few footprints still marking where they had stood, but the light itself was untouched. The lens gleamed like nothing had ever disturbed it. I turned the crank, listened to the gears hum and felt a peace I hadn't known in days. Down below I heard gravel, crunch. I looked through the narrow window slit and saw my daughter standing at the base of the steps, alone. She was holding something under her coat, a small box wrapped in a towel. When she reached the door, she hesitated before knocking. I opened it for her. "Dad," she said softly, "come in before the chill gets you." She stepped inside, eyes red, hair matted with salt. She set the towel bundle on the table and unfolded it. Inside lay the logbook. I hadn't seen it since the night I locked it away. "I took it home," she said. "I wanted to fix the tear." The page was still damaged, but she'd patched it with archival tape, edges aligned with careful precision. "It's not perfect," she whispered, "but it won't fall apart anymore." I ran a finger over the repair. The thin line gleamed in the light like a scar healed over. "You did good." She sat across from me, shoulders shaking. "I didn't stop him, Dad. I wanted to. I thought I could manage it quietly, but I was afraid of choosing sides." "There aren't sides," I said. "Just right and what's easy." "I know," she whispered. "He's furious. Said you humiliated him." "He humiliated himself." She nodded, twisting her hands together. "He doesn't understand. To him it's all exposure and attention. He can't see the difference between being seen and being respected." "Few do," I said. "The first fades, the second lasts." We sat there a long time, listening to the drip of water from the gutters. Every few seconds the light above us rotated, spilling a pale reflection across her face. "I found something else," she said after a while. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper yellowed from age. "It fell out of the back of the logbook. I think Mom wrote it to you." I took it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her small looping letters half slanted as if racing the wind. "Oscar," it read, "if you ever lose your temper with the world, remember that the sea fixes everything in time. We only have to wait for the tide to turn." I felt my throat tighten. She always believed patience was stronger than force. "She was right," my daughter said. "You didn't have to raise your voice to teach him, you just held steady." "That's the only way the light works," I said. "It doesn't fight the dark, it outlasts it." She smiled then, tired but real. "I want to help, Dad. I want to learn how to keep this place the way she wanted it." I nodded slowly. "Start by listening to the sea. It'll tell you when to move and when to wait." Outside, the waves whispered against the rocks, softer now. I poured her coffee, and for a while we just sat in silence, the kind that doesn't demand words, the kind that heals. She left in the afternoon, promising to return after things settled. When her car disappeared down the causeway, I climbed back to the lantern room. The light was due for another cleaning, so I set to work, polishing glass, wiping condensation, tightening screws. Each small act steadied me, the same rhythm my wife had once kept, the same care passed through hands. As dusk crept in, the beam cut across the horizon once more, pure and unwavering. For the first time in years, I wasn't keeping it for memory's sake alone. I was keeping it for the living. In the distance, a single gull rode the updraft, wings fixed, gliding with the wind instead of against it. I looked out and whispered, "You were right, love. The sea fixes everything in time." Then I turned back to the stairs, the logbook tucked under my arm, and began the slow walk down. The tower was quiet again. The light kept turning. And somewhere in that steady rhythm, I felt forgiveness take root. By early spring, the salt grass had pushed through the soil again, green blades trembling in the wind. The sea had found its rhythm, steady, unhurried, no longer the gray chaos that had roared a month earlier. In the mornings, I could hear gulls landing on the rail, tapping their beaks against the glass as if checking to make sure the light was still there. It was. It always would be. The Maritime Heritage Foundation had finished their review and decided to keep Cross Point Light under joint stewardship, half private, half educational. It was the balance my wife had dreamed of. Open to the world, but protected. The easement held firm, the light never again to be treated as someone's toy. My daughter came every weekend. She learned to polish the brass until it shone like sunlight. She cataloged photographs, dusted old tools, and helped visitors climb the narrow spiral stairs. The first time she led a group up to the lantern room, I stood at the base of the tower listening to her voice drift down. Calm, sure, a teacher now. I thought of her mother and how proud she'd be to hear that tone. There were school children that day, small hands pressed against the cool brick, eyes wide as the lens turned above them. One boy asked me if I ever got tired of the light. I smiled. "You don't get tired of something that saves you," I said. He frowned, thinking it over, and I could almost see the understanding flicker across his face like a spark. He nodded and ran to join the others. In the afternoons, when the last visitors left, my daughter and I would sit on the bench outside the tower. She'd watch the horizon and talk about her life in town, how quiet it felt since she'd separated from her husband. The papers had been signed quietly. No shouting, no spectacle, just the slow recognition that some tides can't be turned back. "I should have listened sooner," she said one evening. The sky was pink with dusk. "He never really saw what this place meant to you or to her." "He couldn't," I said. "He's still too young to see beyond his own reflection." She smiled faintly. "You think he'll learn?" "Everyone learns," said. "The sea has a way of teaching, even when we stop listening." The sun slipped beneath the waterline, and the first beam of the lighthouse swept across the darkening sea. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You really taught him respect, Dad, the hard way." I chuckled. "Maybe, or maybe the light did." We sat in silence until the last gull cry faded. When she drove back to town, I stayed on the bench a little longer, watching the glow from the lens sweep across the waves. Later that night, the foundation held a small ceremony to mark the lighthouse's reopening. No influencers this time, no cameras, just locals and a few old sailors who'd once steered by this beam. Willa gave a short speech about preservation and legacy. Then she handed me the microphone. I looked out over the crowd, faces soft in the lantern glow, the ocean breathing quietly behind them, and said, "This light has stood through wars, storms, and the foolishness of men. It doesn't shine for fame or fortune or views. It shines so no one is lost. And if we're lucky, it reminds us that the things worth keeping aren't the ones that make us seen. They're the ones that help us find our way home." Applause broke like gentle surf. My daughter's eyes glistened. I stepped back, handed the microphone to Willa, and turned toward the sea. The foghorn sounded once low and mournful, as if echoing the heartbeat of every keeper before me. Later, after the guests left, I climbed the spiral stairs one last time that night. The lantern room was warm with the smell of oil and glass polish. I rested my hand on the crank, felt the hum of the motor under my palm. Through the window, the waves shimmered faintly under the beam's rhythm. One long, one short, one long again. The signal for home. I opened the logbook, her logbook, and added a final note beneath her last entry. "The light still burns. The sea is calm. Promise kept." I closed the book gently, set it on the desk, and leaned against the window. Far out beyond the shoals, a fishing boat's running light blinked in response just once before vanishing into the mist. The tower creaked, the lens turned, and I smiled. In the end, there was no revenge, only restoration. The sea had taught me long ago, respect isn't something you demand. It's something you live. You keep it burning, steady. Through every tide, every dark night. And if you're lucky, someone else learns to keep it too. And that's how the sea reminded me what real respect looks like. If this story reached you, if it made you feel something, don't forget to hit that like button before you go. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to teach someone a hard lesson in your own quiet way? I read every one of your stories. Until next time, keep your light burning. Keep